the Fit and Healthy Athlete Podcast. Debbie Potts is here to help you burn fat, optimize health, and enhance your performance in life as you age. We'll explore metabolic health, holistic health, and actionable insights with guest experts and deep dives into health topics. Whether you're an athlete or just looking to thrive, let's discover how to become your best self. Let's get started.
Did you know your gut may be one of the most powerful drivers of your bone health, your inflammation levels, and how you age? Most people have no idea how strongly the gut-bone axis shapes longevity, especially for women in midlife and men. Welcome back to the Coach Debbie Potts Show. I'm your host, Debbie Potts, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, root cause investigator, and creator of the Holistic Method and the Future You Blueprint new program. Today, we are diving into a groundbreaking area of science that directly impacts the way we age. The connection between our microbiome, our immune system, and our bone health. If you are a woman in perimenopause or menopause, remember menopause is one day, so the next day you're postmenopause. So we'll say perimenopause one day and postmenopause. But maybe you're just working to stay strong, active, and independent as you age. That's my goal. For men and women, this episode is for you. Before we bring on my guest today, I want to introduce the foundation of our conversation. This is a medical food developed by Sōlaria Biō called Bōndia. I want to explain what is Bōndia as I've been trying it out, and I want to share the science behind it on this podcast with you. Bōndia is a living synbiotic. This means it combines 4 active probiotic cultures with 2 plant-based prebiotics sourced from natural microbes found on our fruits and vegetables. It is kept refrigerated so the cultures stay alive and active, and it's clinically designed to support something we rarely talk about, the gut-bone axis. This matters because bone loss does not start in the bones. It starts in the gut and the immune system. And I never really thought of it this way. But as we age, our microbiome changes and inflammation rises, and our bone loss begins silently about 10 to 15 years before our DEXA scan even catches it. Similar story to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. We need to be proactive and not wait until we have problems. This is why I'm passionate about this podcast, to help you be fit and healthy from the inside out as you age, so you can thrive and not struggle in your future self years, what you're doing when you're 70, 80, 90. I'm just going to say 80, 90 because age 70, I have friends that I work out with, master swimming, for example, that are over 70 and they do not look 70. So I'm going to say 80. When you're 80, how do you want to be shown up to life every day? I want to share tips and tricks that you can do today to be your best self when you're 80 and hopefully enjoying life and traveling and having fun. So here's a study from Bōndia, how you can reduce bone loss up to 85% in the femur and hip. This is the exact area where fractures can be devastating for quality of life and what I'm concerned about when I see my mother who's 84. This is from a year-long randomized controlled trial with 286 postmenopausal women. A reduction of bone loss, but up to 85% in the femur and hip is very important area to measure, as you might have heard about what happens if you have a fall and break your hip when you're older. The outcomes are not good. And users in this study did not just see improvements in bone metrics, they also had better gut balance, reduced inflammation signals, and fewer GI symptoms, almost 80% fewer than the placebo. And this is what caught my attention as a practitioner. You are not just supporting bone density, you are also supporting your digestion, inflammation, metabolic health, healthy aging at the same time. And this is a true root cause approach. So let's get into the science with the person behind this innovation. Today, my guest is Dr. Mark Charbonneau. He is a vice president of research and development at Sōlaria Biō and the leader in microbiome research. He has a PhD. His career has focused on understanding how microbiome, the ecosystems, shape our human health and translating that science into real-world solutions. From publishing in Science, Cell, Nature, to developing a clinical stage microbiome therapy, to leading the team that created Bōndia, Mark is at the forefront of microbiome-based innovation for healthy aging. So today we're going to break down how microbes influence bone health, why current bone health solutions fall short, what the research shows about Bōndia, and what's the future of microbiome-based medical foods on Bōndia. So I want to explain a little bit about inflammation in the gut, and we'll talk about that for sure with Mark. Let me add a few definitions. So, powerful facts about bone loss are not just for women. So I'm going to make sure we address men as well in middle age because they age as well. They're not invincible. According to the CDC, 1 in 10 people will develop osteoporosis after the age 50. And according to the National Osteoporosis Foundation, 1 in 2 women will suffer a fracture in their lifetime due to excessive bone loss. Fractures are not just a mobility issue. They take away independence, increase the risk of disability, and are strongly associated with mortality in older adults. This is why early intervention is absolutely essential. So as you're listening to this in your 40s and 50s, I hope you take ownership of your future self today. Because here's what's missing from our conversation. Bone loss does not start in your bones. It starts in your gut, your immune system, and your inflammatory pathways that we will review today. And scientific community is now recognizing this as a quote we have from Frontiers in Endocrinology. Dysbiosis, or the gut microbiota imbalance, has been strongly associated as the cause of increased bone reabsorption and reduced bone formation through immune modulation, inflammation, and impaired nutrient absorption. Menopause and aging are particularly to blame for disturbances of the microbiota, triggering inflammatory pathways that increase osteoclast activity and bone loss. This is exactly why Bōndia is so innovative, because it targets these root cause pathways rather than simply adding calcium or minerals on top of it. Bōndia is not a typical supplement. It's a synbiotic medical food for the dietary management of osteopenia and age-related bone loss that we can take now. It combines plant-derived probiotics and plant-based prebiotic fibers. It strengthens the intestinal barrier. It reduces inflammation by the inflammatory signaling that accelerates bone breakdown. It supports gut and immune function and has clinically shown to slow excessive bone loss, helping osteoporosis before it starts. Each serving of Bōndia contains 47.5 billion CFUs of beneficial microbes developed using Sōlaria's microscape technology. This process is helping identify microbial combinations that deliver targeted clinical validated benefits. These microbes come from fruits and vegetables, not from soil, not from dairy, and not from chemical fermentation. In clinical trials, participants taking Bōndia twice daily saw improvements in bone mineral density over a 12-month period, especially in high-risk areas as the hip and femoral neck. Stronger bones are less likely to fracture, and preserving density means better mobility, better longevity, and better independence. And yes, people often ask, is it safe with medications? Hopefully you don't have to take medications, but check with your provider. So I wanted to do a podcast on Bōndia science because I was so fascinated by the connection of gut health and how it is really an exciting innovation for bone health because it supports gut health, immune regulation, inflammation control, and bone metabolism all at once. And so now I will bring Mark on the show. I just wanted you to understand what we're talking about today And Mark is the scientist behind this breakthrough product. As I said, he's the vice president of R&D at Sōlaria Biō, creating this product. So enjoy the show. Let me know if you have questions, and I can send you the link if you want to try it out yourself, as we have a discount coupon code I will add into the show notes. Enjoy. All right, I have Mark Charbonneau on the show today because I tried a product out that he helped develop, and I wanted to explain the science behind it because I'm all about helping you be your best self in the future and improving the aging process, especially after recording this on the day after Thanksgiving. Looking at your parents' age might be a motivation, as it is for me, to see all of my parents' friends' age and my mother and losing my father, that you really want to do what you can do now in middle age to improve that process. So I asked Mark to come on the show to explain how we can improve bone health today. So Mark, thanks for joining me on how we can be fit and healthy from the inside out.
Well, thank you for having me join you, Debbie. I really appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Mark Charbonneau. I lead the research and development team at Sōlaria Biō. We're based in the Boston area, but we're really excited because we've just launched our first product for bone health. It is a medical food, and I'll tell you all about that. But maybe before we dig into that, I'll tell you a little bit about Sōlaria and what the company is, why we exist. And so the upshot of it comes from an insight about fresh fruits and vegetables, these foods that we know are very good for us. And we know that they contain nutrients, phytonutrients, things that really benefit our health in many ways. But something that's been neglected and understudied, and we've come to appreciate in the past several years, is that these fresh fruits and vegetables also contain large amounts of probiotic microbes in them. In fact, when you eat a side salad or you eat an apple, you're consuming about as many probiotics as you would get from a capsule that you would buy off the shelf, from a grocery store. And so at Sōlaria, we believe, and the driving insight for or the hypothesis that fuels everything we do at the company, is that those microbes play a major role in the benefits of those foods, and that we can pull them out, isolate them, and then recombine them in combinations that are most beneficial for promoting health, for combating inflammation, and for solving these health issues that we're facing as we age.
Well, add into what's your background. How did you get involved into this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is I'm trained as a scientist, and my background is predominantly in studying the gut microbiome. So originally, I did my PhD at Washington University in St. Louis, studying how the gut microbiome develops in infancy. We're essentially born sterile, and that community develops as we age. And what we were studying is the relationship between those microbes and nutrition. And in particular, we were very interested in the case of malnutrition and working with the Gates Foundation in developing countries and undernourished children. And what we found is that not only are the gut microbiomes of these malnourished children underdeveloped, they're stunted. That plays a causal role in the growth of these children. That not only is the microbiome a bystander, but that it actually helps to drive growth in the context of a healthy microbiome or a healthy, nourished child. And so that's where I started. And after that, I was really interested in translation. How can we take these things that we're learning about gut microbes and about nutrition and turn that into practical solutions that we can bring forward as new solutions to help people and solve these problems? So I've worked for several years since then in biopharma, and met the co-founders of Sōlaria about 5 years ago, and was just enthralled by the idea of these beneficial microbes in fruits and vegetables, and how we spend tremendous amounts of resources and time studying the depths of the ocean. You have researchers looking for life in space, but really the farmer's market has as much or more diversity and potential benefit as any of those places.
So explain to me the difference of fermented foods, because I always think of probiotics from foods as what you're talking about, fruits and vegetables, but they needed to be fermented to get the microbes up.
Yeah, so that's also true. In the case of fermented foods, essentially they have time for the microbes to grow and multiply. Did I freeze?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you
sorry. To grow and multiply. And so what is going on with my camera? Sorry.
That's okay.
So in the case of cheeses or, you think about cabbage, you can think about
Mm-hmm.
the yogurts, they're either seeded or they naturally have microbes in them. They're allowed to grow over some period of time, and then they get enriched for those microbes. But even in the case where you're not fermenting the foods, even if you're talking about like a raw apple or lettuce or
Mm-hmm.
blueberries, those fruits, even if they're not fermented, already do contain microbes both on their surface and inside of them that can contribute to the health benefits of those foods.
Wow. So then you're finding what bacteria strains are best in those products to specifically, you're going into this product, we're talking about bone health. And so how did that come about, connecting bone health to specific bacteria strains?
Yeah, that's a big question. So there are a couple of answers to that. So I'll start with the first, which is how do we, when we take these microbes out of fruits and vegetables, how do we turn those into new solutions? And for Solaria, the real key differentiator for us is finding combinations of organisms, of these both bacteria and fungi, that predominantly yeasts, that work together and amplify one another's functionality, where you get 1 + 1 = 3. You get more functionality. What I like to say is that all of our microbes are superheroes, but we've put together the Avengers, and together they're even more powerful. So your other question was about how does it pertain to bone? What's the connection there? And there's lots to say about bone, but at the end of the day, we can think of bone health or bone loss as a metabolic or an immunological condition. The cells that are in bone, so a lot of people may think about bone as sort of an inert structure, like just a scaffolding inside of our body that's just there, it supports us and doesn't do much else. In reality, bone is a living tissue, just like any other tissue in our body. And there are cells inside of our bone that are constantly building it up and breaking it down. And those processes happen at the same time. And it's important because you want to just not have the bone be inert and not moving, but restructured over time into the most structurally sound and strongest configuration that it can be. And what happens is, as we age, inflammatory signals increase throughout our body. It's just a natural process. If we live long enough, that's going to happen. And those signals signal to those cells in the bone and cause them to more at a faster rate break down that bone. And so over time, you have greater and greater degrees of bone loss as we age. We reach peak bone mass around mid-30s, around age 35, and then it declines after that for everybody, both men and women. But for women, once they hit menopause or perimenopause, with the loss of estrogen, that inflammation is amped up even more, and you have greater loss of bone that happens during that period of time, which puts women in particular at much greater risk for bone loss and ultimately for fractures.
Because of the loss of estrogen, you're speaking more
So
specifically
there
the
are
bone
both,
loss.
yeah, so there are direct effects of estrogen itself, but then there are also indirect effects of inflammation. And
Mhm.
so in everybody, as
Mhm.
inflammation in our body increases throughout our lifetime, we kind of go into this what's called immunosenescence. Our cells get older, they start secreting more and more inflammatory compounds. That drives increased bone breakdown. So that in combination with the estrogen accelerates the loss of bone over time and puts people at greater risk for osteoporosis and for fracture.
So I always think of, okay, here's what happens as we age if we don't do anything about it. And what can we do? What are the choices we have available to improve that process? So we know if we don't do anything, if we don't take action now, middle age, to improve my bone health, not just with exercise and food, but taking in certain supplements, as you'll hear about D3 with the K2 or K2 more specifically to help get calcium into the bone and weight bearing exercise. But you're finding certain microbes that we should have in our gut microbiome, as well as combining that with the inflammation and maybe
Mhm.
supplementing a hormone replacement, estrogen, would
Yeah.
help combine all that together and improve bone health.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is in all of the above. But if we just start with your question about proactivity, being proactive with managing bone health, that's really the
Yeah.
most important part.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think for many of us, especially um, well, for men, there are no guidelines for this, but even for women, the current guidelines for most people, if you don't have a history of a fracture or some reason to believe that you're going to have a bone issue, DEXA scans, which measure the bone density, are recommended to start at age 65. That itself, in my opinion, is a problem. Because if you look at population studies, by the time women reach age 65, 80% of them already have low bone mass or osteoporosis. So they're already at risk. So we already need to be looking earlier. And the other thing is that it's important to, or I should say it's better to keep the bone that you have as long as you can, rather than allowing yourself to get into a position where you have very low bone mass and then try to rebuild it. Because there are a lot of issues with that, and there are drugs that do that. They do some good, but there are consequences to it that are not ideal either. And so what we're looking at is what strategies can we use both in terms of exercise and supplementation, but also through the immune system with products like ours, Bōndia, that uses microbes in the gut to reduce inflammation, to help at those early stages reduce those inflammatory signals, reduce that bone breakdown, and keep the bone that you have. And so what we found in our study, we looked at a cohort of 286 women that were all 1 to 6 years post-menopause. What we found is that by taking Bōndia every day for a year, women who had osteopenia, so that means that they already had some low bone mass, their bone loss in the hip was reduced by 85% compared to untreated. So, I guess getting back to your question, there are many, many things that we can do and probably that we should do to maintain our bones. You talked about calcium, vitamin D. There's evidence, if you look at all the clinical studies that are out there, that those together have some benefit, but they're not sufficient. We also know that weight-bearing exercise has a benefit. People should be doing that as well. But on top of that, we think that even further we can modulate or manage our immune responses to reduce that bone loss even further and have the best outcomes overall.
So I've been trying to explain this. I'll let you tackle explaining inflammaging with gut health, understanding the immune system, where is it primarily located, and how the microbes are connected to that.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think if I was to talk to myself for the first time about this, I would say, well, what's the connection? You've got microbes in the gut and you've got bone. Like, how do they talk to each other? And the answer is through the immune system, right? But that's a fairly simplistic point of view. One of the things that we've learned over the past 25 years is that the gut microbiome plays a major role in educating our immune system. So think of it this way, that the gut, the inside of the gut, is not really part of the body. It's sort of inside the body and encapsulated and closed. And your gut serves as a barrier that protects your body from all those microbes that could be pro-inflammatory. And a couple of things happen. First, if you have some level of inflammation, if you have decreased function of that gut barrier, things that are inside the gut, including microbes and their products, can move into the body and cause inflammation. But you also have so-called good microbes, ones that work with your immune system and sort of educate it to both tolerate microbes that are not pathogens, that are not going to cause problems, and also to improve gut barrier function. So in the case of Bōndia, we've shown in laboratory studies using in vitro gut models, both that this combination of microbes can reduce inflammatory signals, but it can also increase the function of that gut barrier to further reduce inflammation throughout the body. And so although the gut and the bone don't actually touch one another, those immune signals travel throughout the body, and you can have distal effects throughout the entire body from what's happening in the gut.
So are you referring to leaky gut, that we're having mucosal damage to the gut wall lining and having that barrier broken down?
That's exactly right. So we've shown that with Bōndia in our in vitro gut models, that administering it can reduce that leakiness of the gut barrier.
Yeah, because I've been talking about that a lot over the last couple of years, going into these different rabbit hole topics to understand how important all of this is to improve the rest of your body. So just what goes on in that midsection, there's a lot of activity there that if we can get that improved and avoid holes in our gut wall lining, so the bad guys seep out and cause this chronic inflammation and then cross the blood-brain barrier and more chronic cognitive health issues. But you're speaking to bone health. I just think that's just so fascinating how if we have gut inflammation, dysbiosis, you're saying that's more connected to having leaky gut, mucosal damage, and having inflammation seep out, and how that can impact our bone health.
Yeah, exactly. And so, when I mentioned that there are cells in the bone there are two types of well, there's more than two, but the two types of cells we often think about in the bone are osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Blasts build up bone, clasts break down bone, and they're always both working at the same time. And ideally, you would have a balance. Now, when we're very young, you have much more bone buildup than you have bone breakdown. And as we age, like we mentioned, eventually the breakdown kind of outpaces the buildup. But both of those cell types are derived from immune cell lineages, and they respond to immunological signals. So if you have more pro-inflammatory signals in the body, that tells those osteoclast cells that break down bone to speed up. Well, it can tell them to make more, but it can also tell them to speed up and break down bone more. And so by reducing that inflammation throughout the body, we're essentially telling those to slow down and helping to restore that balance.
So what bacteria strains are you looking at, microbes that you're trying to increase with the probiotics?
Yeah, so two answers to that question. The first is one of the things that we found in our clinical study is that in individuals who had greater bone loss or who saw greater benefit from from Bōndia, from this medical food, if you look at their gut microbiomes, they were less diverse. They had fewer bacterial species in their gut, but they also had a complete absence of many of these species that we think of as anti-inflammatory, that make these anti-inflammatory compounds in the gut, like the short-chain fatty acids, that can reduce that inflammation.
So
with
more
Bōndia,
butyrate related?
yeah, exactly. So butyrate producers were very, very low or completely absent in those individuals. It was really striking. And so with Bōndia, although Bōndia doesn't make butyrate itself, we have designed this combination. It's four microbes that are present. They're all from fruits and vegetables. And they are designed to work together to make short-chain fatty acids. In particular, they make acetate, but they do it in a way that's synergistic. So when you put the four of them together, you get much greater amounts of the anti-inflammatory acetate than you do if you take any one of the members out. So having all of them together, that team of the Avengers, is really important for that functionality. The other thing that we found, and you touched on this earlier, is that the amounts are important. The concentration of the probiotics is important. We showed this in animal studies that we published a couple of years ago, that as you increase the concentration of the microbes that you administer, you get a greater benefit on the bone. And so when we manufacture Bōndia, we produce it at a much higher concentration of microbes than you find in many comparable products. So it's both of those things. So it's having the right microbes. That it's not a kitchen sink approach, because microbes can work against each other. It's finding the right ones that work together to amplify each other and making sure you have enough of them to have that benefit.
So what are the four producers that you're using to promote short-chain fatty acid increase in the acetate?
The four strains. So the four strains that are present in Bōndia are Lactobacillus plantarum, a Lactobacillus brevis, a Leuconostoc mesenteroides, and a Pichia kudryavtsevii. So that Pichia, that's actually a yeast. The others are bacteria. So it's three bacteria, one yeast. All of them are new strains that we've isolated from plants, edible plants, and again, just put them together because they amplify one another's functionality.
Yeah. That's why I'm always interested in the research part of it and which bacteria strains, as I had, 10 years ago, Karan on the show for Microbiome Labs, and started learning all these crazy names of these bacteria strains that I never say correctly unless they're just simple names, but I butcher them often. But understanding that, I was just sharing in other videos just last week and recording different podcasts on my own test results doing the GI map and I've done many tests over the years and correlating that with genetics and blood chemistry. So what have you found would be effective as maybe the practitioner lens to be that health investigator to help people figure out where are you now? And would this be something that'd be beneficial for you so we can see, all right, let's test in 6 more months, see if we increase bone health, bone density as a DEXA scan, but internally your microbiome testing.
Yeah. So, you could do microbiome testing to look for these anti-inflammatory microbes. I think if you're interested in bone health in particular, the DEXA scan is the best thing. They are commercially available. I think you can get them for under $100 if you're able to do that. The challenge can be sometimes getting your doctor to do it, getting to order it. Waiting until you're 65 for the first scan is, in my opinion, that's far too late. And we should be looking earlier. We should be looking as early as, 40 or 45 and identifying individuals who are already at risk for or having declining bone mass and then monitoring them over time. And the nice thing about that is you can look at the DEXA scan over time if you're able to do them in repeats and look at whether you're trending in the right direction or not. And if you're
Yeah.
getting benefits from the regimen that you're on, whether that includes Bōndia, exercise, vitamin D, and calcium, to try to optimize your own considerations or your own situation. So DEXA scan is sort of the gold standard. If that's not available, there are other technologies that you can look at. There's something called REMS, which enables it's sort of a quick way that you on the spot can get a bone density measurement. I think more work needs to be done to figure out how they correlate with one another, those two measurements. But I think looking early and often is the right approach.
I know DEXA scan, I think it's dexascan.com or something. There's a new directory out because I have Pinoy metabolism testing that I owned, and they just reached out to have me on listed as a provider, but I know it's mostly DEXA listing. So people can find, if I think it's dexascan.com or whatever it might be, but just search online, find someone locally. It's something I always feel that we need to take ownership of our health today and not wait until we have problems. And that's kind of what our medical system sadly is designed to just wait until
Yeah.
you're having illness or bone health or osteoporosis, and it's a little late. So what I'm trying to get people to understand is, what do you need to do now in middle age to prevent that and keep an eye on it so you are paying attention to those red flags, not
Yeah.
waiting until you fracture your hip and you're in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, you're exactly right. So the current way we manage these things is we wait until there's a problem, then we deal with it. And part of this comes from, I think, a the way that we think about bone health is usually as a binary. Do I have osteoporosis or don't I? And if I don't have osteoporosis, I'm good, no problem. If I do have osteoporosis, I have to do something about it. That is not really how things work. In reality, bone density is a spectrum, and osteoporosis is just the clinical cutoff for when someone has extremely low bone mass. And your risk of fracture, the lifetime risk of fracture for a woman over 50 is nearly as high if you have osteopenia, which is an intermediate state of bone mass, as if you have osteoporosis. So waiting until you have osteoporosis is not, in my view, the best leading to the best outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say about that when it pertains to the drugs, which is sort of waiting until you have very low bone mass and then putting yourself on a bisphosphonate or a bone building drug, is that because those drugs are effective at adding bone mass, but there are issues with them. The biggest one, if you're looking at something like a bisphosphonate, which is commonly the sort of first line if someone is diagnosed with osteoporosis, is that the longer you're on those drugs, the higher your risk is of an atypical fracture. And so the analogy I like to think of for this is like, imagine, so it's the drugs are rapidly putting a bunch of mass into your bones, but it's not doing that natural process of rebuilding and restructuring that your bone ordinarily does. It's just sort of lumping a bunch in there. And you end up with bones that are very dense, but not necessarily very strong. So you can think about it like, imagine concrete without any rebar in it. It's very dense, but if it got hit the right way, it would just crack and fall apart throughout the entire thing because there's nothing holding it together. It doesn't have the right structure. And that's what can happen with some of those drugs. So maintaining the bone you have when you're younger and keeping that as long as you can and keeping that strong is going to lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to insulin. Getting insulin measured, the insurance won't cover it, and it costs $15 to do, but they won't test you under insurance until you're diabetic. So it's a little late. So I could have had this information 10 years before I had the problem of being type 2 diabetic, having insulin resistance for years. So I'd like for you to go a little deeper, as I like to go dig deep into the podcast, on understanding again how this works with the gut health. And you mentioned, the gut wall lining and leaky gut, and you can go geeky because we talk deep all the time.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is actually a really exciting time. We just published a paper in the Journal of Functional Foods studying how Bōndia, this combination of 4 microbes, works to reduce bone loss and improve bone health. And essentially what we found is there are three ways that it works that are all consistent with one another and that intertwine with one another. So the first is what we mentioned about gut barrier function. And so we found using our in vitro gut models, so this is where you've got a dish and you seed that dish with a layer of human cells that form a gut barrier in there, and you've got a top and bottom to it, and you can put microbes on one side and immune cells on the other side and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that when we do this, when we put Bōndia, the 4 microbes, into that dish, the tightness of that gut barrier, which we measure by electrical resistance across the barrier, that barrier function is increased significantly by the presence of Bōndia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually concentration independent. You put any there and it boosts that up. And so that tells us that it is decreasing the leakiness of that barrier, which will help prevent inflammatory molecules from making their way across into the body. So that's one way. Apart from that, we've also found that Bōndia, the microbes together, can reduce the production of inflammatory signals by immune cells. So we've taken immune cells. These are actually taken from perimenopausal or postmenopausal women. They give blood donations. We isolate out their immune cells, and then in the context of a laboratory experiment, expose them either directly to Bōndia or to the products of Bōndia, and found that those immune cells, when you give them an inflammatory stimulus, like an endotoxin, they produce all kinds of inflammatory signals. That's their job. But when you pre-treat them with Bōndia and then do that, it reduces the amount of inflammatory signals that they produce. And then the third thing that we found, and this I think is a very cool set of experiments, is we wanted to understand how that inflammation connected to bone. And so what we did were experiments where, again, blood samples were taken from postmenopausal women that donated their blood and differentiated those immune cells into those osteoclasts, into cells that break down bone. And then we can take those, so these are human immune cells that are differentiated into osteoclasts, put them onto bone. So we put them onto bone chips in an experiment, and then look at how much bone they break down over the course of a few weeks. And you can measure that in a couple of different ways. One of them is a biomarker that indicates bone breakdown. And they do. They break down bone. It's pretty cool. But when you pre-treat them with Bōndia or the products of Bōndia, or in fact, either directly the products of Bōndia or the decreased inflammatory signals by the immune cells, and you put those onto the osteoclasts, the amount of bone that they break down is significantly reduced. So it's reducing inflammation, improving gut barrier function, and reducing breakdown of bone.
Wow, that's crazy. So fascinating. So with the gut barrier, how exactly does that work?
How does it improve it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. We're still doing experiments to try to understand like what signaling molecules actually do that. Some of that we don't totally have elucidated yet. It's probably a very complex mechanism, but we think that it's relating to upregulation of tight junction proteins that hold the cells together and kind of keep that barrier as tight as possible.
Because I keep learning like Akkermansia, the mucin part of the Akkermansia bacteria can help the mucosal barrier. And then there's the glycolics layer that I'm learning about that's above that. And then there's the villi and how the gaps in between to seal that, but how that'd be so interesting to learn more how exactly that helps.
In this case, our data is related to the function of that cell barrier itself, the epithelial cell barrier, and how the cells hold themselves together, how they resist and prevent things from moving across. We haven't looked specifically at mucus production or the mucus layer.
Yeah, so the little villi, so people can see there's images of that everywhere. You can find it has great how they're connected, and then how they get the gaps in between each, even in with the villi themselves. So you can see that strengthens the bond, connects them, so we don't have the gaps in between. Right.
Well, it's gaps between the cells themselves. So villi, this is sort of depends on the region of the gut you're looking at. So the villi are most prominent in the small intestine, and their main function is they increase the surface area a lot. So it helps us absorb as much nutrition as possible. And they're like little fingers, and you've got hundreds of millions of them that stick out. And the crypts that are sort of in the middle and between them, they have other functions as well. But the barrier function we're talking about is each villus and everything along is made up of cells that are sort of in a line that form a barrier.
Mm,
And we're talking about how tightly they hold on to one another. Because if you have
mhm.
gaps in between them, you can have things that move in and out and can cause that inflammation.
Yeah, it's just the microbiome and the gut wall lining and all that is just so fascinating, and how important it is to how we feel and how we age and the nutrients we get or not get. And just with the mitochondria in playing in that role as well is just so much ongoing research coming out. I know, but is this what you studied in college? You said you studied the microbiome. So is that an area
Yeah,
of
yeah.
degrees
This
now?
It's an area of, well, I didn't have no, it wasn't a major, but
Microbiome specialist?
it wasn't a major. Maybe it is now. I've been out of college for quite a long time, but yeah, I've always studied microbes and microbes in the gut, and there's so much we're learning about it even now, about how these things function. It's such a complex system. The interactions
Mhm.
between, and first of all, there's so many different species and functions that they can encode, as well as how they interact with various cell types in the human body. It's really incredible the effects that it can have. Some of it, I think, is just sort of building a mental model for ourselves about how the
Mhm.
system works in a way
Yeah.
that actually represents reality. So, something that I learned along the way, we talked a bit about the mucus layer, and so this is in the large intestine. You have a thick layer of mucus that covers the gut barrier, and most of the gut microbes, or at least most of the metabolically active gut microbes that are present in your large intestine, they live in that mucus layer, either
Mhm.
attached to the surface of it or into it a little bit. And part of the mucus layer functions to protect the body from it forms part of that barrier, right? So you've got the barrier of the cells themselves. You also have the barrier of the mucus that's so tight that they can't physically get through it. You do have bugs like Akkermansia that can break some of it down, but they live in the mucus layer that also provides an energy source for the microbes to produce these anti-inflammatory compounds. You mentioned butyrate. Butyrate's a major one. Something like 10% of all the energy our body takes up is in the form of butyrate, because the microbes, they make the butyrate, which is a four carbon chain compound in the gut. And then the cells of our colon, of the epithelial lining, they take that butyrate, they oxidize it. It's a fat, so they can break it down like any other fat. And when they do that, it does a couple things. It gives them energy, so we get a lot of our energy from that. And predominantly, that's going to come from fibers that we as humans couldn't break down, but the microbes can. So we get extra energy out of our food. And in the process of breaking down that butyrate, our cells consume oxygen, and that keeps the inside of our intestines low oxygen to prevent the overgrowth of things we don't want, things like E. coli, salmonella, right? And so we get the good guys that stay in there under their anaerobic environment and to keep the bad guys down.
Hmm. Yeah, it's something I think it's interesting to test, to look at microbiome testing and see what's going on under the hood of what can we do, what's missing, what's out of balance. And a lot of things, as my own example, I just did sharing my own case study, how there's so much correlation to symptoms you might feel that you have no idea that's related to your gut health and your microbiome and different bacteria strains that are too high or too low. And
Yeah, I think the important thing is going to be we need a lot more information, but not just correlative information. We need direct connections with health outcomes so that we can not just give people a report of here are all the microbes in your gut, but what does it
yes.
mean and how do you do something about it, right?
Yeah.
And make actionable changes. Um, and I think that we're not quite there yet. I think we need more clinical research and understanding.
Well, as FDN practitioners, that's kind of what we do, is investigate and put all the clues together to create
Yeah.
protocols for people to blueprint. But going into the microbes, we talked about the 4 different ones that you're looking at in your Bōndia, and how is it a different probiotic than other ones on the market that's
Yeah,
unique?
that's a really good question. So first, the strains themselves are unique in the sense
Mhm.
that these are strains isolated from fruits and vegetables. They're not present in any other product. I also mentioned the concentration is very important. So
Mhm.
having a high concentration, we have between 10 and 100 times as many probiotics in Bōndia as you'll find in comparable products, and that's very important. We've found for the bone health benefits. But that aside, the the specific combination of the microbes is very important. We've invested a lot of time and effort at Sōlaria to understand the interactions between the microbes in our library and in our products. And one of the things that we found is that more is not always better, right? So you might think you put together good bug A, good bug B, you're going to get even better, right? That's not really how the biology works. In fact, you can have a lot of really interesting interactions where you put the two microbes together and they inhibit one another. Or maybe microbe A makes a lot of an anti-inflammatory compound, but then you put it with microbe B and it shuts it down. We find that happens all the time. By contrast, what we're looking for are the opposite, where you get amplifications of you put A and B together and you get even more, right? And so if you're looking at another product where they're taking the kitchen sink approach of put more microbes. Okay, now we've got 30 microbes, 40 microbes. We've got everything. It's so good for you. I don't subscribe to the idea that that's a good thing because we don't know how they interact with one another. Even if on their own they're beneficial, how does putting them together impact their overall functionality? And we've made a conscious decision to find those combinations of microbes like the 4 that are in Bōndia that work together and amplify one another's functionality and design the product in a very intentional way.
Now, when you get it shipped to you, it comes refrigerated and you keep it in the refrigerator. Why is that?
Yeah, well, that comes back to the point of the concentration being so important. So we include in the product about 100 times more probiotics per capsule than you'll find in comparable products. And for that reason, they're chocked full, and we want to keep them as alive and healthy as possible, and keeping them in the fridge helps to keep that fresh. Now we have found that you can keep the product at room temperature. So for example, you keep it with your other medications. You can keep it at room temperature for 30 to 60 days. That's totally fine. That's not going to be a problem. But for longer storage, we recommend keeping it in the refrigerator just to maintain that high concentration of the beneficial microbes.
And how does that go into your body? You take one or two a day. You said start with 1 and build up to 2 a day.
So you start with, we recommend taking it morning and night. So you keep the concentration high in your gut throughout the day. Start with 1 at each and then 2 at each. Build up to that. How does it happen? So they're in capsules, and the capsules are enterically coated. And what that means is that they're going to make it through your stomach intact into your small intestine before that capsule starts to release and let the microbes out to do their job. This is really important also. So I mentioned we have to have high concentration, but they have to be alive to do their job. And we've actually shown in clinical studies that we can recover our microbes live from stool samples from people that have taken them. So we know they're making it all the way through. And part of the reason for that is that our stomachs are very, very acidic. I think most people know that.
They're supposed to be.
That's its job. But what you might not know, what I was surprised to learn, is that it's always acidic. It's hard to combat that. So even if you're taking Tums, even if you are on a proton pump inhibitor, your stomach is still going to be very acidic enough to kill microbes. So we have formulated this product, Bōndia, in capsules that make it through the stomach intact. So they're protected from that acid, and they can get to the intestines where they can do their job without being broken down by that acid.
Yeah, because that's different. With the probiotics in grocery stores, they have to be refrigerated, but I found a lot of them I've heard are not going to bypass that stomach acid and your body temperature when you take them. So they're not as good quality at the grocery store type of section of probiotics. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, I can't talk about any particular products, but what I can say is that in general, the concentration of live microbes you're going to be getting from those is much, much lower because they will often package them. Companies will often package them with an overage so that, they anticipate 90% are going to die. So by the time you take it, you've got a lot less. But, in particular examples, we've cultured some of these to see how many are there, and it's a lot of them are dead.
So when should someone start thinking about that they might need something as Bōndia?
That's a great question. I think for women in particular, around the menopause transition is it's a major shift where there's a very rapid decline in bone mass that happens in the 5 years surrounding menopause. that is an important time, in my view, to be talking to your doctor about bone health, ideally getting a DEXA scan, and be looking at proactive measures like Bōndia, as well as exercise and supplements to help maintain that bone. Really anyone, though, in middle age can and should start thinking about their bone health. At a minimum, doing weight-bearing exercise, try to maintain as much as you can and supplement. I'm not very good about taking my calcium, so I need to get better about that. But and Bōndia is a good addition to that if you and your doctor believe it's right for you.
I'm laughing because I find doctors don't talk about nutrition at all or nutritional therapy.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
I don't know any doctor so far that it's very rare to find doctors who are going to help you with that. So maybe finding the right information, someone to work with on that. But the benefits for men, I'm sure, benefit because men are not not and they're not invincible. That's the word I'm
No,
trying to
we're
think of,
not
but they are
invincible.
men. They have some chance of bone loss, I would think, not estrogen related, but just as
Yeah,
we
I
age,
mean,
they age.
it's the same. It's kind of the same story. I mean, with the exception of the menopause thing, because men don't have that. But the peak bone mass around in your mid 30s and then decline for the rest of your life. That's also true for men.
Yeah.
It's it's a problem as much for men as it is for women. Now the rates of osteopenia and osteoporosis are lower because we don't have that steep drop off in menopause. Now, as it pertains to solutions, so our clinical study that we published in Osteoporosis International for Bōndia that showed strong protection, particular for women with osteopenia. We didn't enroll any men in that study, so we can't make strong claims about that. But what I will say is that in principle, the immunological mechanisms that underlie how Bōndia talks to bone cells and how it reduces inflammation and reduces bone loss, there's no reason to believe that that would not apply to men. And in fact, when we did our in vitro studies that we just published in the Journal of Functional Foods, we also included cells from men, from male donors, and found that there were similar immunological effects on those as well.
Yeah, so I find that interesting, and I always like to point out that men need to take care of themselves as much as women, even though they might have their menopause, their own version. But I find that so much attention's on women, and I always make sure we talk about men's health as they age as well, because they might not have to have the big changes that we have with our hormones changing, but they do have changes and they need to take action too. Because as I said in the beginning of the show, watching my mom who's 84 and watching my husband's father who's 92 now, and just how important it is just watching your future self. If you just look at your parents, and that's good motivation going, all right, I don't want to be shaped as a chair when I get up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I learned over the holiday week with my family.
Good.
Get
Well, I
up and you're
appreciate
still looking like it.
appreciate the attention to men's health as well. I take Bōndia, and certainly the bone health benefits are part of the reason. But one of the other things that we found in the study, which was quite interesting, and this may be related to what I was saying about the effects it has on inflammation in the gut and on gut barrier function, but we also found, in addition to the bone health benefits, a significant improvement in gut health symptoms for people who were taking Bōndia compared to placebo. We saw about an 80% reduction in the reporting of severe GI symptoms. So things like constipation, nausea, were significantly fewer in people taking Bōndia. That's actually why I take it currently. I mean, the bone health benefits are for me also good, but I like to think about it as the long-term benefit is for bone, but in the short term, if you get a gut health benefit, if you're also feeling better, that gives you a reason to value it now.
And I think it's important combining it with the lifestyle habits you're talking about, nutritional therapy, that we're eating good foods and have proper digestion, have a strong vagus nerve to have the digestion processes happen in the right order of operations. That I think all of that working on our aging process and creating that future you blueprint needs to involve all of this, eating the food, but we still need to add these supplements where we're not getting enough of these bone building nutrients in our food plan, especially people that have digestive issues. And I find most people have a lot of microbiome issues too that they could improve on. So this seems like it will improve many things, not just bone health.
Yeah, certainly. I'd like to think so. That's been my experience with it anyway.
Good. Well, where can we send everyone to learn more and see the research studies themselves? I know there's great information on your
Yeah, well, the
website.
best place to go is our website. It's solaria.bio, Solaria.bio. That's where you can find links to all of our scientific studies. We also have information there that makes it a little bit more digestible, pun intended, and of course links to purchase Bōndia.
Amazing. Well, I thank you for your time sharing the science. I always like to understand the mechanism of action and really looking at a deeper level to help understand the why behind everything. So I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Before you go, I wanted to give you a little bit of an ingredient breakdown before we leave today. A simple overview of what is actually inside Bōndia, because the formulation is one of the reasons this product stands out so much in the bone health space. Bōndia contains just 8 ingredients, and every single one of them is derived from plants, fruits, and vegetables, fermented foods or algae, nothing synthetic, nothing artificial, nothing inflammatory. Hopefully not. And we need to look at the ingredients when we're looking at products and reviewing them. So here's a breakdown. Of course, big words, but bacteria, Lactobacillus brevis and Leuconocosocomesenteroides. I totally butchered that. Both probiotic strains sourced from squash gourd support gut integrity and immune balance. Lactobacillus plantarum and Picha cuda via eva. You should hear me say my Hawaiian words when I'm in Kona. Not so great at the street names. So these bacteria come from traditional fermented pepper paste, a vegetable-based food rich in beneficial microbes. These strains help modulate inflammation and support nutrient absorption tied to bone health. Organic blueberry powder, providing antioxidants and natural prebiotic fibers that nourish the gut microbiome. Oligofructose from hickory root, a powerful prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria and supports gut barrier strength, which is essential for nutrient absorption and inflammatory balance. Vitamin D from marine algae, a clean plant-based source that supports bone mineralization and healthy vitamin D status. And finally, a vegetable-based capsule made from plant cellulose rather than gelatin, keeping the formula completely vegan and clean. One thing I appreciate about their philosophy, the probiotic strains are not derived from human stool. I did not know that many commercial probiotics are derived from human stool, but instead come from edible plants and fermented foods, something humans have been exposed to for years. And Bōndia delivers 47.5 billion CFUs per serving, and the capsule is designed as a precision release system to help these microbes survive stomach acid that we went over and reach the gut intact. Something you want to look at when you're taking a supplement probiotic that comes refrigerated. You want to understand and ask the company, does this microbe survive the stomach acid levels and the body temperature? Sōlaria reports that each batch is verified for potency, stability, and what they call biocompatibility. And on the research side, their in-house and published data show that these strains can help strengthen the gut barrier integrity, reduce inflammatory cytokines, and decrease osteoclast activity, the cells responsible for breaking down the bone. It's a minimal, thoughtful, food-based formulation supported by in vitro testing, preclinical data, human clinical trials, all aligning perfectly with the root cause whole body approach to aging well. And this is why I found it very intriguing and an innovative gut and bone formula that I've heard about before, and I wanted to share it with you. But before I try any supplement as this, I always like to look at the source, the ingredients, third-party testing, what is their research backing of the formulation, and how do you know if it's working or not. So if you'd like a link, you can send me a message. You can use our discount code Coach Debbie Potts and let me know what you think. But having some baseline data on maybe a DEXA scan would be beneficial, and looking at, say, your GI map as baseline and do that every 6 months would be helpful. All right. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening, and share with someone that might be interested in improving their future self. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Fit and Healthy Athlete Podcast. Coach Debbie Potts draws from decades of experience. Ready to optimize your health? Visit www.debbiepotts.net for a discovery call. Find her on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Coach Debbie Potts. To support the show, like, rate, and review. See you next time.